That's right. Welcome to this morning's Roundtable. I'm Anthony Smith here with a host of experts and professionals. We're talking about the USA Truck acquisition. I'm here with Kevin Hill, JP Hempstead, and Tony Mulvey, and we're going to dive into the subject here. And I'm going to kick it off to Tony. Tony, can you quickly break down what happened in this deal? What are we seeing right now?
So DB Schenker, German-based company, acquired USA Truck based out of Van Buren, Arkansas for $435 million. It's not really a surprise because of USA Truck's, what they've been saying for about the last, they've been kind of on this media show. But then you've also got the DB Schenker, who said they were trying to get into the US market and looking for potential strategic acquisitions. So it kind of makes sense from that point. But it was really the first big deal acquisition of a major U.S. trucking carrier in quite a while. So I think from that impact, it's pretty interesting when you start to see it. I mean, JP, Kevin, feel free to chime in on just your initial thoughts when you saw the news break that USA Truck was getting acquired and then the acquirer itself.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, Tony, that it wasn't surprising that USA Truck got acquired. I think what's most interesting about it is that, of course, it's a European 3PL, and the DB Schenker that we think of, the DB Schenker that's heavily involved in contract logistics and international freight forwarding, of course, is just a division of what is essentially Germany's national railroad, right? So when you think about can German railroaders navigating the U.S. trucking spot market, there's got to be some interesting sort of cultural conversations that happened post-acquisition and things like that. I wonder, there have been so many other attempts over the past few decades for international companies or transportation providers from other modes to get into trucking. Some of the time it's worked, some of the time it hasn't. Time, honestly, I do think time will tell. I like USA Truck a lot. I think for their sort of heavily spot leveraged model, the way that they've been able to balance logistics revenue and trucking revenue has been really good. Operating ratio of 90.7%. The second quarter was fine, and actually depending on what Schenker wants to do with the network, it could be much lower, or they could simply keep it as something that is sort of like high beta performer that captures all the upside when USA Trucking goes crazy, as we know it can. So I mean, I think there's going to be several threads in this story to follow as the acquisition and the integration are completed. But yeah, Kevin, what do you think?
I think the most surprising thing, I agree with everything said, the most surprising thing to me was the premium. It was 118%, 119%, all cash deal, $31 and change. If you think about it, if you bought the stock in early 2019, at $3 and change, you made 10 times your money. Right? We talk about 100 baggers, all the time around here, 100 bagger stocks. That has potential, as a 10 bagger in 2 years. So do they overpay? Well, you're looking at synergies, you're looking at control, you're looking at that strategy. That might justify the price, but could they have bought at 25, 22? Who knows? They did buy at 31 and change, and I will guarantee you it was probably a pretty good time earlier this week in Van Buren, Arkansas, and Fort Smith, Arkansas, and probably over the border in the casinos in Oklahoma as well, because, I mean, it was a really good triumph to do that, and kudos to James Reed and company. They came in about 4 years ago to do a turnaround story for USA Truck, and you can't get much better than $3 in 2019 to selling your company to $23 billion DB Schenker for $31 and change, 10 times your return.
That's right. And so, Tony, when we look at this deal overall, what are going to be some of the other components that get included in this? We're looking at equipment and things like that.
Yeah, so I mean, USA Truck's fleet, it's about 1,900 trucks, right, in that range. Then they have, you have so not just the equipment, but you also do have real estate as well. So it's a way to kind of buy into this U.S. real estate market and the trucking market. I mean, if you think about buying a new truck at $150,000, which it's probably even higher than that, it's just a number that I can think of off the top of my head. I mean, you're looking at 1,900 trucks, it's about $255 million. So I mean, there is a little bit of that premium there in terms of just the equipment, but you're also buying the network. You're buying some of the customer base. I mean, But it's also a value add from DB Schenker's point of view. I mean, as a forwarder, well, now they can offer domestic truckload movements, and it's in their own network, under their own assets. They're not having to go out and secure capacity in the open market. So from that, the synergies and things like that, it makes a little more sense. But it's a big equipment play. I mean, you're talking, again, 1,900 trucks. For somebody, like JP said, it's their German railroad, but they're also a massive forwarder, right? So it's a big difference in what they've been doing, but it's taking a whole lot of equipment on at one time.
I mean, it could, like, I think that the premium could, like, the premium tells me that, like, they intend to operate USA Truck in a different way that it's been operated so far. They intend to create value in a different way. And whether that means, like, folding it in, tightly integrating it with their international freight components so that they can actually, sort of sell like a whole freight movement, like a door-to-door freight movement in a way. That's interesting to me. There have been other experiments like that when Union Pacific bought, I think, Overnight, which then eventually became UPS Freight, which was then sold to TFI. Like these things can be done with trucking fleets. It's just a question of like Tony pointed out, like, does the physical infrastructure line up with the way that freight would need to be consolidated and deconsolidated? Do they get into things, maybe not like a parcel carrier, but do they do some sort of things like postal injection, right? Like that Amazon has been able to do, where they can move different kinds of international parcels and be in control of their own capacity once it hits the U.S. shores, which are it can be a place where margins evaporate if you don't know what you're doing.
It is. You're talking about control, and it's really about control, vertical integration, controlling your own destiny. We just went through a couple years of really tight capacity where you're at the mercy of the market, and acquiring USA Truck gives you vertical integration, gives you control over the capacity. You dedicate it to your forwarding business once it hits the shores, and really have control of your destiny. And you can ride out these market swings and volatility that seem to happen every 12 to 18 months. And that's the goal. That's the big synergy. Now, saying it and executing it are two different things, and we'll see how that story plays out.
I think, and just to add on to where you said that dedicated, I mean, that's, if you look in how the public markets value dedicated and things like that, and even the private market, I mean, there is that, having that secured capacity really does add the value, and you see it, and it shows up in the public markets when you look at companies that have very big dedicated contracted services versus those that are heavy spot exposed.
Yeah, and you're talking about forwarder, right? I mean, you're really a shipper in a lot of ways, especially when you're talking about domestic truck market. So you're basically acquiring a private fleet. Your DB Schenker's acquiring a private fleet, doing that vertical integration, and really controlling their own destiny.
I think it's very hard for foreign or European transportation providers to enter North America with a purely 3PL non-asset play.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I don't know, like Costco Shipping tried to start a freight brokerage in Los Angeles, how well would that go? So I mean, we've seen deals like Maersk buying Pilot Freight Services where the assets are important. They are a big part of the way that they pitch to their customers that yes, we will actually be able to execute this freight. We will be able to offer you the same kind of seamless visibility, for example, that we're charging a premium for. So to me, the asset is probably necessary for them to enter the market in a significant way.
And they've done that. They've done it, and whether whatever you think of the premium, it was a huge premium, but the size of the deal, compared to the size of DB Schenker and then the companies is not massive, right? It also, it gives a lot of other trucking companies, both public and private, an exit strategy as well, and the benchmark metrics and comparables to see what's out there and what's available and what can be done. So it's encouraging news for a number of different companies in that space.
comparably sized fleets for sale. And secondly, some of the other ones may, like to Tony's point about dedicated, may have like certain kinds of hangups, right? Like they may have business that doesn't that doesn't overlap with what DB Schenker's doing, or whether it's some kind of like specialized equipment or like some sort of on-site presence at a shipper where they're like tightly involved in certain customers. Like a lot of times, like you can't just like buy those businesses and then add them on to what you're doing internationally. So like there could be a sense in which a large fleet that is built to be very responsive, built to be very flexible and opportunistic, may actually be the easiest kind of fleet for them to adapt to their own purposes.
Exactly right. If most of your business, if you're highly exposed to the spot market, you can move those pieces around depending on you are moving those pieces around depending on market volatility and margin. So you don't really have the most stable customer base compared to having a lot of dedicated service.
Right, and as like to the extent that they're like an international freight forwarder, they're able to see where these volumes are going to hit. Whether it's the airport, whether it's a container terminal at a port, and ideally like position assets in advance and take advantage of those sort of spikes in demand.
And in closing here, we're talking about this still, but do we expect, Kevin, I'll kick it back to you, do you expect the frequency for acquisitions to kind of start to ramp up as we get further and further into 2022 and even into 2023?
That's a really good question. I mean, if you're talking about the trucking side, as we talked about, there's not a lot of targets out there. It's a very small pool of fleets of that size. When you talk about 3PLs and freight brokerages, I think it might cool down a little bit as we go through this transition. You never want to sell at the bottom of the market, and we're going to a trough, right? We've passed the peak, we're going to a trough. It's not really a good time to sell. So I would expect it to cool down a little bit over the back half of 2022 into 2023, but I'd like to get.
Yeah, no, I think that. The container ship lines will have to figure out what to do with their extra cash, right? They don't want to build the order book, which is already reaching record levels, even more than it already is. So how do you deploy this windfall of capital without just creating more capacity and crashing your own rates? Acquisitions could be a part of that for several years going forward.
I just echo what they have to say. I mean, it's going to be this kind of who's buying, right? The who is wanting to be out there acquiring versus maybe the acquisition targets, right? So you're going to see steamship lines and things like that. They have all this excess capital. They don't need to be buying all these ships if demand's falling off a cliff. So it'll be interesting.
Interesting indeed, gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us for this roundtable this morning. And thank you all for tuning in. We're going to toss it over to Sydney Edwards, who's going to have a look at our headlines.